Steam and Sorcery, a transdimensional adventure starring Phineas Frakture and Sir Vlishginath the Cleansing Light. Episode 2. Written by Joseph Gatch and Daniel Mitchell. Read by Fentriss O. Moore. Phineas didn't realize that he was falling until he was face down on a brick pavement. Moaning, he shook his head to clear his vision and then gasped for air as his lungs recoiled from the shock of hitting the ground. He inhaled deeply and then gagged. "Smells like Jersey," he grumbled. It was then that he noticed he had landed mere inches from a pile of manure. He looked around and couldn't believe his eyes. Not Jersey. They don't have roads this nice. Phineas stood up and was bewildered at what he saw. Where in the name of Sir Isaac H. Newton did I land? This is not the other New York. Around him was a city teeming with life, though not a city like he had ever seen in his travels. Where he expected brownstones and warehouses, he saw simple wooden buildings with thatched roofs. In the distance, great towers of stone rose into the sky. The people, instead of wearing suits and bustles, donned simple cotton and wool clothing, the kind that you would find on medieval peasantry. The smell of nature was overpowering after being in New York. It was clean, fresh, and also stank of unwashed persons. They all looked at Phineas as they went about their business. Some stopped and stared, whispering to their neighbor and pointing at the sky and at him. Phineas scrutinized them as well. "I should have learned dentistry. I could have made a fortune here," he muttered. The murmuring suddenly turned to screams, and there was a sudden rushing from the people down the street. The crowd parted, bringing a huge form into sight. A hideous beast that looked as if it were made from the earth itself charged down the street toward Phineas, smashing market stalls and swatting stragglers into the sides of buildings or flinging them back over its shoulder. Instinctively, Phineas reached for his Tesla rod and snapped it open, activating its charge. The thing was upon him in a matter of seconds, and just as it reached for the wayward traveler, Phineas jabbed it with the rod and unleashed the full charge into the creature. It howled with pain and fury as it shook violently from the electrical discharge. The rod sputtered and died, causing the creature to look down with relief and confusion. Its eyes suddenly rolled to the back of its head, and it teetered forward. "Oh, crap," Phineas said for the second time in as many minutes. The monster, thing, whatever, collapsed on top of him. "This thing stinks. Can someone get it off of me?" Phineas yelled, hoping that someone was close enough to hear him or at least understand him. "Anyone? A little help here?" There was the clink of steel on steel, and he heard the scuffle of footsteps approaching. A hand grasped his, pulling him from under the creature. With little effort, his savior pulled Phineas to his feet. Phineas spat out a tuft of hair that tasted like moldy tree bark, dusted himself off for the second time, and adjusted his goggles on his head. He looked up at the man before him and felt his jaw drop. Wearing a full suit of plate armor with a leather chest overlay emblazoned with a sunburst emblem containing what looked like an angel holding a sword, the man before him was the most imposing yet inspiring person Phineas had ever seen. Raven black hair topped a chiseled face that had seen weather and war. Deep blue eyes took in everything they saw, and Phineas felt as if they bore into him, reaching into his very soul. Hi?" Phineas managed to get out. The crowd had suddenly converged around them, watching the aftermath of what just transpired. For some reason, they were all in awe of the situation. Phineas wasn't sure if it was him that they were watching or the man before him. Suddenly, someone from the crowd yelled, "Wizard!" and there was a collective gasp from the group. Phineas looked around and brought his hand up, the one holding the Tesla rod. "He's got a wand!" cried another, and before long, the man in armor had drawn steel, his long sword flashing brightly and producing a ringing sound as if it was loosed from its scabbard. Coming up behind him was a monster of a man, standing taller than any Phineas had seen before, and clad in a suit of black plate that must have weighed a ton. Put the wand away, wizard, the blue-eyed man said, sliding his helmet on and bringing his shield up between himself and Phineas, the monster in black plate cracking knuckles the size of Phineas's head in anticipation. Phineas rolled his eyes at the move. More metal. Real smart, Lancelot. He then shook his Tesla rod amidst gas from the crowd, and it collapsed back into its compact form. He replaced it in his pocket belt. So, what now? Suddenly, Phineas felt his feet leave the ground as the giant's hand guided him forward. I guess we go this way, Phineas grumbled. Making their way along the wide roads of ascension, Vlishginath and Maximus walked with the wizard between them. His attire alone would have been enough for Vlishginath to realize he hailed from lands far removed from the Western kingdoms, but the way he looked about him with an intellectual curiosity made Vlishginath wonder exactly how far removed he really was. Where are you from, wizard? Vlishginath asked as they rounded the corner onto the man-gate road that would lead them to the church. I've already told you, I'm not a wizard, the man said again, showing signs of increased agitation and impatience. But Vlishginath had witnessed firsthand the device the man kept in his belt, and he knew magic when he saw it. It was then that the three of them bumped into another man, the stranger walking between them, quite literally. 1,000 pardons. I'm afraid I wasn't paying attention. All the excitement lately has me watching the sky. Coming to a halt, Vlishginath narrowed his gaze, eyeing the man suspiciously. Roderick, what are you doing in Ascension? Smiling innocently, Roderick reached up and removed his black silk top hat, dusting himself off as if coming in contact with the stranger Vlishginath and Maximus were leading had somehow sullied his attire. Visiting friends, actually. A rather boring affair, and one I wasn't looking forward to, truth be told. But as luck would have it, the fates saw fit to provide me with all the entertainment I required. And who might this be? The mysterious stranger from the market square that the church knights have taken into custody? When the stranger went to speak, Vlishginath held out a hand to silence him, keeping his eyes trained on Roderick. One and the same. Who were these friends of yours you were visiting? His smile widening, Roderick sighed and shook his head. Sir Vlishginath, how many times must I prove myself before you'll finally begin to trust me? At any rate, I'm afraid I haven't the time to stay and chat at the moment. I have other pressing engagements awaiting me at my estate, and I have a long trip ahead of me. Then, turning to the stranger in the middle, Roderick inclined his head politely before looking back to Vlishginath. Until we meet again. That said, Roderick turned, giving the strange man the briefest of devilish grins before brushing past them, donning his hat once more and moving on. Shaking his head, Vlishginath resumed the march, Maximus urging the stranger along with him. Did anything about that seem off to you, Max? Maximus grumbled, remaining silent for several seconds before answering. I don't like that man. It was at the moment the stranger in the middle chimed in. If I may interject, I really must protest to being questioned. So far as I know, I haven't broken any laws, and don't you worry, wizard. Once we get you sorted out, you'll be free to go. But not before you speak with the lore master, Vlishginath said. I have a schedule to keep, and I'm not a wizard, the strange man mumbled, shooting Maximus a concerned glance when the half-giant let out a dark chuckle. He's from where, you say? Lore Master Garadane asked, seated at his desk. Standing before him was Sir Vlishginath, and seated across his desk was High Priest Volgoth, an acolyte having brought in a chair for him to sit as they spoke. We're not entirely certain, Lore Master, Vlishginath replied. I thought it best if I waited and brought you in when we first spoke with him. He wielded a wand with deadly proficiency and brought down the troll that came from the hole in the sky, but he claims he isn't a wizard. He reached up and rubbed the back of his neck, shrugging his shoulders helplessly. How do we know he did not bring the troll through with him? Volgoth asked, raising his eyebrows suspiciously. Shaking his head, Garadane puffed at his pipe for several moments, contemplating his response before speaking again. If he had brought it through with him, I doubt he'd have put it down in such a manner. But
If he is in fact proficient in the arcane arts, but doesn't bear the standard of the Academy, we may well be dealing with a sorcerer, in which case I would very much like to speak with him.
Nodding, Vlishginath gathered up his helm that had been laying on the lore master's desk. I'll have Maximus bring him up to the war room at once.